On the evening I thought would be quiet, my own son raised his hand against me over a bowl of soup. But believe me, the sting of his palm was nothing compared to the words that followed. His wife, standing smugly at his side, looked me in the eye and said, "You can't even cook a proper meal. No wonder nobody needs you here." That moment broke something inside me. I am 68 years old, and yet I felt like a small child again, ashamed, unwanted, erased from the very home I had built with my own hands. The house smelled of broth that night, simmering on the stove, a recipe I had made for decades. I had been careful as always. The carrots had been cut thin, the chicken slow-boiled until tender, the noodles rolled out by hand. Cooking was never just about food for me. It was a way to show love without words. But when my son lifted the spoon to his mouth, his face darkened. "Too bland," he muttered. Then louder, angrier, "What is this? Can't you even add enough salt?" His voice sliced through the kitchen like a blade. I tried to explain softly, I kept it lighter, for your health. I even managed a weak smile. But he didn't hear me. Or maybe he did, and it only fueled him more. He slammed the spoon down, broth splattering across the table. And then, before I could even step back, his hand struck me. Just once. Quick. But the shock of it made the walls tilt around me. My cheek burned, but it wasn't the pain that hollowed me out. It was the betrayal. The same hand I had once held as a boy, the same hand I had guided across crosswalks and tucked into mittens on cold mornings, that hand had turned against me. And then came her. My daughter-in-law leaned casually against the counter, arms folded, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You can't even cook a proper meal," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "No wonder nobody needs you here." Each word hit harder than the blow. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her cruelty was deliberate, polished, like a knife sharpened for one purpose, to cut me down where I stood. I looked at her, hoping to find even a flicker of humanity, but her eyes only reflected satisfaction. As if this moment had been waiting to happen. As if my humiliation was the seasoning she thought the soup lacked. I sank into the nearest chair, my body trembling though the kitchen was warm. The air smelled of garlic and onion, but all I could taste was bitterness. I wanted to protest. To say, I raised this man alone. I gave him everything. I opened this home to you. How dare you? But my throat locked. The words froze. Instead, I sat silent, as though I had no right to defend myself under my own roof. She continued to speak, each remark heavier than the last. "You spend all day here doing what? Cooking slop and dusting old furniture? You should be grateful we let you stay at all." Grateful. That word dug into me like a thorn. Grateful? For what? For living in a house that I had worked 2 jobs to pay off? For eating at a table I had bought with my own overtime checks? For the roof I had patched and the floors I had scrubbed until my knees ached? But still, I said nothing. Because at that moment, silence felt safer than truth. I stared at my son, waiting for him to stop her, to tell her she had gone too far. But he only stood there, jaw clenched, eyes cold. The boy who once cried when I scraped my knee, the man I had defended against neighbors, teachers, and bosses, he was gone. All I saw now was someone who believed her words, someone who had decided I was no longer worth respect. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. I remember the way my hands trembled as I picked up the spilled spoon, broth dripping onto the floor. She laughed softly behind me. Laughed. The sound was sharp, cruel, and it echoed inside my chest like a hollow drum. I thought of all the meals I had made over the years. Birthday cakes with crooked candles. Thanksgiving turkeys basted through the night. Christmas pies cooling on the windowsill. Every dish was a piece of my life poured into theirs. And now they looked at me as if I was nothing more than a burden with wrinkled hands. I excused myself, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll clean this up." My son gave no reply. She turned her back and scrolled on her phone. My presence no longer mattered. As I scrubbed the floor, the tile felt colder than it ever had. My knees ached, my back bent, and yet the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm inside. Every movement of the rag reminded me of my place in their eyes, silent servant, invisible woman, relic of the past. When I finished, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The soup pot still bubbled quietly, but no one cared. The house, once filled with laughter, now felt like a cage. I touched my cheek, still hot where his hand had landed, and I realized it wasn't just flesh that hurt. It was memory. It was history. It was love, twisted and repaid with contempt. That night, I lay awake in my room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of their laughter drifting from the living room. They were watching television together, carefree, as if nothing had happened. I pressed the pillow against my ears, but the noise seeped through. It wasn't just the sound of their laughter, it was the sound of my own erasure. I had been replaced, pushed aside in my own home, and no one noticed but me. Resentment burned slow, like a coal that refuses to die out. Each word of hers replayed in my head. No wonder nobody needs you here. Those words carved deep lines into my heart. I could still hear the way she said nobody's, stretching it, making it heavy, as if I was less than nothing. And my son's silence was worse. His silence meant agreement. His silence meant betrayal. I had lived a lifetime for him, and now he watched as I was torn apart piece by piece. That night, as I stared at the ceiling, I thought, is this what my life has become? A woman discarded like an old chair, left in the corner until someone decides to throw her away. Tears did not come. I was past tears. What filled me instead was a quiet, cold clarity. This was not just a bad day. This was the truth of how they saw me. And if I stayed silent, if I stayed still, it would become the truth of how I saw myself. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, staring at the shadows on the wall. My cheek still felt warm from his hand, but what kept hurting more than anything else were the memories. They rushed back one after another, as if my whole life had been waiting for this moment to remind me of what I had given and what I had lost. I remembered the nights when my son was just a boy. I worked 2 jobs back then, barely sleeping, just to make sure he never felt the hunger I felt as a child. I came home late, my feet swollen, my eyes heavy, but I always went straight to the stove to cook for him. Even when all I had left was rice and beans, I made it warm, I made it filling, and I told him it was his favorite. He would smile, and for me, that smile was worth the pain in my back and the cracks in my hands. When his father left us, I promised myself I would never let my son feel like he was missing something. I told myself I will be enough. I have to be enough. I denied myself new clothes, vacations, even small comforts, so he could walk into school each morning with new shoes and a backpack that didn't make him stand out. I thought love meant giving until there was nothing left for me. Years later, when he was older, he talked about college like it was a dream far away. I made sure that dream became real. I cleaned houses on weekends. I worked late at the office, taking extra shifts. I skipped meals so I could save money. When that acceptance letter finally arrived, I felt like I had won the lottery. I remember the way he hugged me then, so tight I could barely breathe. "Mom, I'll make you proud," he promised. And I believed him. I sat through every graduation ceremony, every milestone, with tears of joy in my eyes. I didn't think about how much it had cost me financially, emotionally, physically. All I saw was my boy stepping into the future I had built for him, brick by brick, with my sacrifices. Then came his marriage. I wanted him to be happy. When he brought her home, I tried to welcome her with open arms. I cooked her favorite meals when she visited. I gave up my bedroom so the young couple could have privacy when they stayed overnight, and when they finally moved in, I stepped back. "This is your home now," I told them. And I meant it. I even dipped into my savings to help them with the down payment. I told myself, they're starting their life together. They need help. That's what family is for. I didn't realize back then that every time I stepped aside, every time I gave away another piece of myself, I was teaching them that my needs didn't matter. When the grandchildren came, I thought life had finally rewarded me. Those little hands reaching out to me, those little voices calling Grandma, that was my joy. I cared for them while their parents worked. I woke up at night when they cried, so their mother could sleep before her shift. I cooked, I cleaned, I played, I rocked them to sleep. I told myself I didn't mind being tired because love makes sacrifices feel lighter. But over the years, the gratitude faded. The words "thank you" came less often. Then they stopped altogether. Instead, I began to hear whispers of criticism. You spoil them too much. You don't feed them the right way. You let them stay up too late. Each word chipped at me, little by little, like water wearing down stone. I think back now and I see how often I was pushed aside, dismissed, overlooked. The signs were always there, but I didn't want to admit it. When holidays came, I worked myself to the bone preparing meals, decorating the house, making sure everything looked perfect. Yet when the compliments came, they were always directed at her. "This turkey is amazing. You've really outdone yourself." And she would smile politely, accepting praise for food I had spent hours preparing. I stood there in the background, apron still on, hands red from scrubbing pots, and no one noticed. It was as if I had become invisible in my own home. There were other moments, small but sharp. I remember once when I bought new curtains for the living room, just to brighten up the space. She walked in, looked at them, and said, "These look cheap." Then she laughed like it was a harmless joke. But it wasn't harmless to me. Another time, I made soup for the children when they were sick. She tasted it and said, "Why do you always cook like it's the 1950s? Nobody eats this kind of stuff anymore." I swallowed my hurt as I always did, but inside, resentment grew. Not because of the soup, not because of the curtains, but because of the disrespect. Every word, every gesture told me I didn't belong, that my efforts had no value. And my son, my own flesh and blood, stood by her side each time. Silent. Sometimes even smiling. The boy who once clung to me when he was scared of thunderstorms, the man who once swore he'd always take care of me, now let his wife cut me down with words sharper than knives. And then, that night with the soup, he crossed a line I never thought he would. The slap still stings in my memory, but worse is the way she looked at me after, like I was nothing. Like I was an intruder in the very home I had built for them. Lying awake, I realized something painful. My whole life had been spent giving, but I had never taught them how to value what I gave. I thought my sacrifices spoke for themselves. I thought love would be enough. But instead, they learned to see me as a background figure, a safety net, a servant who existed to support their lives. And when I grew old, when my hands slowed and my back ached, they no longer saw use in me. That truth sat heavy in my chest. I remembered my mother's words from long ago. She once told me, "Child, if you give too much without asking for respect, people will take until there's nothing left." At the time, I brushed it off. I thought, no, my son is different. He will love me back. But now, sitting alone in the dark, I realized she had been right all along. Every insult, every laugh, every moment of silence from my son replayed in my mind like scenes from a movie I didn't want to watch. Her words, "No wonder nobody needs you here." His silence, heavier than any insult. The children, once reaching for me, now learning from their parents to ignore me. It all came together in one painful truth. I had built a life for them, but not for myself. And they used that life to erase me. That night, resentment filled me like never before. It wasn't a loud, burning anger. It was quiet, steady, heavy. I sat there thinking of every birthday I had missed for myself, every dress I hadn't bought, every vacation I never took, just so they could have more. And in return, I had been given nothing but disdain. It was like watching my whole life being rewritten, all my love twisted into something meaningless. But even as the memories cut me, a new thought began to form. If I had survived this long, if I had carried this family on my back for decades, then maybe I still had strength left. Not to keep giving, not to keep suffering, but to finally take my life back. The morning after the slap and the cruel words, I woke up before the sun. My body felt heavy, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. For once, I didn't start the day by boiling water for their coffee or folding their laundry. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my papers and thinking, this is the day I take my life back. The house was quiet. My son had already left for the office. I heard the faint click of the front door closing an hour earlier. That left just me and her. I walked into the kitchen to pour myself tea, and there she was, leaning against the counter with her phone in hand. She didn't even look up before saying, "You should clean the living room before the kids come home. It's embarrassing when friends see the mess." Her words were ordinary, but the tone was poison. I stood there with the cup in my hand, and for the first time, I didn't rush to obey. I didn't even answer. I simply looked at her. My silence must have unsettled her because she raised her eyes and frowned. "What?" she asked with that same sneer she used whenever she wanted to remind me of my place. I didn't reply. I set the cup down, walked back to my room, and picked up my purse. Inside were my documents, the deed to the house, my identification, and the folder I had been too afraid to touch for years. For the first time, I realized how much power those papers carried. I called a taxi. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to sound steady. Within 15 minutes, a yellow car pulled into the driveway. As I stepped outside, my daughter-in-law's voice followed me. "Where are you going?" "Don't forget the kids come home at 3. I didn't answer. I closed the door behind me, my heart pounding as if I had just broken out of a cage. The ride to the lawyer's office felt unreal. The streets passed in a blur, shops, schools, mothers pushing strollers, all the ordinary life I had been missing. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window and thought, this is what freedom feels like. Fear and hope all tangled together. At the office, the lawyer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, welcomed me in. I told her everything. My words shook, but once I started, I couldn't stop. I spoke of the insults, the slap, the years of silence. I told her about the money I had given, the sacrifices I had made, and how my own home had turned into a place where I was treated like a servant. She listened without interrupting, just nodding and writing notes. When I finally finished, she leaned forward and said, "You have more control here than you think." She explained the steps one by one. Rewriting my will so everything I had worked for would not go to the people who humiliated me. Canceling every power of attorney I had signed when I trusted my son too much. And most importantly, filing an eviction order. I felt my breath catch. Eviction. Against my own son and his wife. For a moment, guilt rose inside me. Could I really do this? Then, almost like an echo, I heard her voice again. "No wonder nobody needs you here." And my son's silence. And his hand. Yes, I could. When I signed the papers, something inside me shifted. My hands were steady, my back straighter than it had been in years. I walked out of that office with a new will in my purse and the eviction documents in progress. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was deciding. But here's the twist. On my way home, the taxi passed by the elementary school. Children were rushing out, backpacks bouncing, laughter filling the air. For a moment, I saw my grandchildren in that crowd. My heart squeezed. Would they understand? Would they think I had abandoned them? I remembered all the afternoons I had walked them home, carrying their bags, listening to their stories about spelling tests and playground games. They had never been cruel to me. They were just children, learning from the examples set by their parents. Tears blurred my eyes. For a second, I wanted to tell the driver to turn around, to take me anywhere but home. I thought about giving up, about letting things stay the way they were. At least then, I would still be near the children. But then I remembered my own father. When I was 15, he told me I had no right to dream. He said, "Girls like you are only good for working and serving others. Don't expect more." His words scarred me so deeply that I carried them into adulthood, always believing I had to earn my worth through sacrifice. That memory hit me like lightning. This is the same mistake I've made all over again. If I keep allowing myself to be humiliated, my grandchildren will learn the same lesson, that love means silence, that dignity can be stripped away without protest. No, I couldn't let that happen. By choosing myself, I was also teaching them something different. I was showing them that even at 68, a woman has the right to stand up and say enough. When I returned home, she was waiting. Arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Where have you been all day?" "The kids will be home any minute, and nothing is ready." "Honestly, what do you even do around here?" Her words used to pierce me, but now they bounced off like arrows hitting stone. I looked at her calmly and said, "You'll find out soon enough." The confusion on her face was almost satisfying. She was used to my silence, not my strength. She muttered something under her breath and walked away, but I didn't care. Inside, I felt taller, stronger. That evening, as I sat alone in my room, I pulled out the copy of the eviction notice and stared at it. My hands didn't shake anymore. I thought about the years I had lost, the insults I had swallowed, the love I had poured into people who only drained me. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt alive. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't throw plates or slam doors. My revenge was quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. The power was no longer in their words or their actions. It was in my decisions. And tomorrow, when they learned the truth, their laughter would stop. That night, as rain began to fall softly outside, I opened the window and let the cool air in. The sound of it against the glass was steady, like a heartbeat. I breathed deeply, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Peace not because everything was solved, but because I had finally chosen myself. When the letter arrived in the mail, I didn't rush to bring it inside. I already knew what it said because I had signed the papers myself. Still, I sat with it on the kitchen table, sipping tea slowly, waiting for the sound of the front door. By evening, my son came home. He tossed his keys onto the counter the way he always did, without looking at me, already speaking to his wife about something from work. But then he saw the envelope. He picked it up, read the first lines, and froze. "What is this?" His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. She walked over, snatched the paper from his hand, and scanned it quickly. Her face drained of color. She turned to me with wide eyes, her voice high-pitched. "You can't do this. You can't evict us." I didn't answer. I simply lifted my cup and took another sip. The silence stretched across the kitchen like a wall. For years, I had filled that silence with explanations, apologies, excuses. Not this time. My son slammed the paper onto the table. "Mom, what have you done? This is insane. This is our home too. Our home." The words made my chest tighten. For decades, I had scrubbed these floors, painted these walls, patched the roof when storms tore shingles away. I had signed every check that kept the lights on. And yet here he was, claiming ownership through entitlement, not effort. Still, I said nothing. My daughter-in-law stepped closer, her tone sharp. "Do you realize what you're doing? You're tearing this family apart. You're ruining everything we've built." Ruining everything they had built? The bitterness rose in me like bile. What had they built? I had given them this roof, my savings, my time, my care. I had built the foundation, and they had decorated it with cruelty. I wanted to shout it out, to throw every memory of sacrifice into their faces. But I didn't. My silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. The days that followed were filled with chaos. She stormed through the house on the phone, calling relatives, crying into the receiver. I overheard her say, "She's losing her mind. She's trying to kick us out." After everything we've done for her, everything they had done for me, I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. What had they done except take, insult, and demand more? But I kept my lips sealed. My son tried a different approach. He came into my room one evening, standing in the doorway like a stranger. "Mom, we need to talk. Look, I know things have been rough. Maybe I've been hard on you. But this is too much. You can't just take the house away." He paused, waiting for me to respond. My hands were busy folding laundry. I didn't even look up. The silence unsettled him. He shifted on his feet, his voice rising. "Say something. Do you even understand what you're doing? You're going to put us on the street." For a moment, I thought of the nights I had sat in tiny apartments, eating toast for dinner so he could have school supplies. I thought of the times I had walked to work in the rain so he could ride the bus dry and warm. I had already sacrificed enough for him to stand tall. If he was on the street now, it was because he had chosen arrogance over gratitude. Still, I kept silent. They accused me of everything. "You're destroying the children's stability. You're being selfish in your old age. You're punishing us for no reason." Each word stung, not because they were true, but because they were lies told so easily. Lies spoken by the very people I had lifted up my entire life. I sat through their anger, their tears, their endless arguments. I became a wall they couldn't break. The neighbors started to notice. One afternoon, while I was watering the flowers, I heard her on the porch talking to someone from next door. "She's impossible," my daughter-in-law complained. Can you believe she would betray her own family like this? We gave her everything. I almost dropped the watering can. They had given me everything? My stomach turned with resentment so sharp it almost doubled me over. Yet I straightened, adjusted my grip, and continued watering. The neighbor glanced at me nervously, but I only nodded as if nothing had been said. My silence burned hotter than any reply. The children, sweet and unaware, began to sense the tension. One evening, my granddaughter asked softly, "Grandma, why is Mommy so sad?" Her small voice cracked my heart. I wanted to scoop her up and tell her everything. To explain that sadness wasn't mine, it was theirs, born of their greed and cruelty. But I couldn't put that weight on her young shoulders. So I hugged her and whispered, "Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind. But it's not your fault." Inside, I promised myself she will learn the truth one day, but not through words, through the example I set now. The house felt like a storm, but at the center of it, I found stillness. Every accusation they hurled reminded me why I had taken this step. She said, "You're heartless." He said, "You're tearing this family apart." Together, they said, "You'll regret this." But in their fear, in their panic, I saw something I had never seen before: respect. Twisted and reluctant, yes, but respect nonetheless. They finally realized I was not their servant. I was not their silent support. I was the owner of my life, my choices, and this house. One night, their desperation boiled over. My son banged on my door. "Mom, please. We'll change. We'll do better. Don't do this to us." For a second, my heart wavered. He sounded so much like the boy who once cried when he scraped his knee, running into my arms for comfort. But then I remembered the sting of his hand across my face, the silence when his wife mocked me, the way they treated me like invisible air. My chest hardened again. I didn't open the door. I didn't answer. I let the silence be my reply. The eviction date grew closer. The papers were real, the process official. They knew it. And with every passing day, their fear grew. Her voice lost its sharp edge, turning into shaky pleas. "You don't have to do this. We can make new rules. We'll respect you more." Respect me more? After years of insults? After erasing me in my own home? It was too late for promises. I began to notice the small ways they tried to manipulate me back into my old role. She cooked once and left the plate at my door, pretending kindness. He offered to drive me to the store, something he hadn't done in years. But I wasn't fooled. These were not acts of love. They were acts of fear. Fear of losing what they had taken for granted. And for once, I let them feel it. Inside me, resentment burned steady. Every cruel remark they made in the past echoed now. When she said, "You can't even cook a proper meal." When he said nothing, letting her words stand. When they laughed in the living room while I sat alone in my room. All those moments piled up, and now they were paying the price. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Because the truth is, I didn't need to. They knew. Every look on their faces, every frantic word, every sleepless night, they knew exactly why this was happening. And they knew it was too late to change it. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully. Their panic became my calm. Their fear became my strength. And as the days ticked down, I finally felt like the mistress of my own life. The eviction deadline came and went, and the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. No footsteps stomping down the hall, no sharp remarks tossed my way, no laughter from the living room that excluded me. Just silence. I thought peace would settle in quickly. But instead, the first thing that arrived was a message. "Mom, this isn't over. You've destroyed everything." I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone down. My heart squeezed, not because of the words themselves, but because they carried no apology, no trace of regret. Only blame. The next day, another message lit up my phone. "You'll regret this when you're alone. Family is all you had, and now you've thrown it away." That word, family, made my chest ache. Family was the reason I had sacrificed so much. Family was the reason I had worked my hands raw, skipped meals, stayed up late caring for children who weren't mine to raise. And now, family was being used as a weapon, a rope to pull me back into chains. But I didn't answer. Soon, The calls began. Sometimes it was him, sometimes her. His voice sounded strained, her sharp and angry. "You ruined our lives. You'll die lonely. The kids will hate you for this." Each word carried the same message. They weren't sorry. They weren't grateful. They were only desperate. I listened to the voicemails once, then deleted them all. But they didn't stop there. One evening, just as the sun was dipping low, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. When I opened the curtains, there they were, standing on the porch, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. He knocked first. "Mom, please. Let's talk." Behind him, she crossed her arms, her eyes darting toward the neighbors' windows, clearly embarrassed by the scene. I opened the door just enough to look them in the eyes. My son's face was pale, his jaw clenched. Her lips were pressed thin, but I could see the anger burning behind them. "Say something," he begged. "Anything. Tell us we can work this out." I thought of the night he had struck me. I thought of her sneer when she told me I wasn't needed. I thought of every time they had laughed together while I sat alone. And then I thought of the silence I had chosen, the silence that had given me back my strength. I didn't reply. I simply closed the door. Inside, I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. It hurt to do it, but it hurt less than staying in chains. Through the window, I saw her grab his arm, her voice sharp even though I couldn't hear the words. She was blaming him. And for once, I wasn't part of their fight. I was simply free. A week later, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A woman I used to work with before I retired. "I heard what happened," she wrote. "I just want you to know I always admired how strong you were, how much you carried on your own. You deserved better. Don't let anyone make you feel small." My eyes filled with tears as I read her words. Gratitude from someone who had no reason to flatter me, no reason to reach out. Her message reminded me that my worth had never depended on my son or his wife. Other people had seen me. Other people had respected me. It was proof that I wasn't invisible after all. But the pressure didn't stop. They tried guilt. "You're tearing the family apart." They tried pity. "We have nowhere else to go." And finally, they tried anger. "You'll regret this when no one comes to your funeral." Each line was like a stone thrown at my heart. But instead of breaking me, they piled up into a wall that kept me safe. Every cruel word reminded me why I had chosen freedom. Every accusation only proved they hadn't changed. Nights were hardest at first. I would sit in the living room, the quiet pressing in, and remember the years when I dreamed of nothing but togetherness. I had wanted noise, family dinners, laughter around the table. But those dreams had been crushed long before I ever filed the eviction papers. The truth was, I had been alone for years alone, even while they lived under my roof. And now, the silence wasn't emptiness. It was peace. One afternoon, my granddaughter slipped a letter into the mailbox. Her handwriting was messy, the way children's always is. "Dear Grandma, I love you. I miss your soup. I don't care if it wasn't salty." I pressed that paper to my chest and cried harder than I had in years. She had seen me. She had remembered me, not as the woman her parents mocked, but as the one who had cared for her with love. That letter gave me something her parents never could: hope. Slowly, I began to rebuild my days. I planted flowers in the front yard. I walked to the park. I joined a group at the library where women my age gathered to share stories and laughter. For the first time, I was living not as someone's mother, not as someone's grandmother, not as someone's maid, but as myself. And it felt good. Sometimes, when the phone rings, I still see their names on the screen. Sometimes, the messages slip through. "You'll regret this. UOS. You're heartless." But each time, I delete them, because I don't owe them my silence anymore. I don't owe them my life. One night, I sat in the living room with the windows open, the cool air drifting in, carrying the sound of crickets outside. I looked around at the house I had once thought of as a burden, and felt something new. Not shame, not fear, not resentment. Peace. This was my home again. Mine. No one could take that from me now. I am 68 years old. For the first time in decades, I wake up each morning and breathe freely. I cook what I want, not to please anyone else, but to nourish myself. I sit where I want. I move when I want. And when I look in the mirror, I see not a servant, not a burden, but a woman who finally defended her dignity. Yes, I lost my son. Yes, I lost my daughter-in-law. But in losing them, I found myself. And that is a trade I would make again and again. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, if you've ever been told you're not needed, remember this. You are not alone. Age is not weakness. Age is not invisibility. Age is strength. Age is dignity. And I will never forget that again.